Joey Pillay on the far left, who is the Chief Director for Public-Private Partnership here in the Western Cape Government. Thank you, Joey. We've got Andy Tambwe, who is the Head of Technical Services at the Industrial Development Corporation. Thank you, Andy. We have Mohale Rakgate, who is the Chief Investment Officer at Infrastructure Fund at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. And we have Zakele Mayisa, who is the co-head at the Africa Infrastructure Finance at Nedbank. Thank you so much, sir, for also joining us. And Leila, I will start with you. With your extensive research in financial institutions and infrastructure financing across Africa, how is the African Development Bank helping when it comes to these private-public partnerships?
Thank you very much. I will try and be brief because the list is long, but let me try with the macroeconomic policy. So, following the successive shocks that we have seen and impacted all our that the way the governments finance development has changed.
Leila, apologies there. If you can just use this mic for now while we sort this one out.
Okay.
Apologies.
So it is clear, as I was saying, that governments has rethought the way they finance development. And we are helping them in doing so because the expenses or the public expenses towards social, health and education are increasing. We need to tackle inequality. So financing the needed infrastructure needs to involve private sector. So we are doing it at different levels. So first of all, at the structural reforms level, and I think His Excellency President Ramaphosa mentioned it, so we are supporting the government of South Africa, in particular last year, and we will continue towards the reforms in terms of private sector participation, in particular in the energy sector, but also all the critical reforms. With critical reforms, we cannot go ahead. Second, I think it's important as we look at this public-private partnership, we have said it, preparation, but also how the governments have the capacity to negotiate these, contracts or agreements with the private sector. So PPPs or IPPs, if you don't have 50% benefits on one side and 50% on the other side, it will not work. We have seen it in some sectors, in the water sector, when it has not been well negotiated. So we are using the Africa Legal Support Facility to provide, this capacity building, this support, in particular to governments, but also play the sometimes as a main lead arranger, etc. So this part is important. What is also important is to finance in a way that we can provide this blended finance that we are talking about. So the comparative advantage of the African Development Bank is that financing the sovereign part, we are financing the private sector, which is the non-sovereign part of the PPPs, but we are also mobilizing trust funds, in particular the climate trust funds, but not only. We are mobilizing also some other funds that will help to look at, we are talking about the just energy transition, we are very much in it, in IPPs, but we need to look at, the social part, so we are bringing some concessional finance to do so. So, and finally, what is also important is the Africa Investment Forum, the platform of investment that we have created. It's led by our President Adeshina, whereby it's a de-risking platform with partners like the DBSA, like the European Investment Bank, like, sister organization that can bring together this guarantee platform, but also we are bringing investors, international and African, in boardrooms for selected projects to finance, and in particular PPPs and IPPs. So the next iteration of the Africa Investment Forum will be 5th to 6th December.
Andy, if you can please pass the mic over to me. Thank you. What are some of your considerations as IDC when funding is?
Thank you, Clement, and good afternoon, everyone. I think the IDC perspective, as per our name, Industrial Development Corporation, we look at a developmental impact. We look at economical viability when we look at these projects. We look at transformation of the landscape of economy in South Africa. We want to be involved where we can facilitate creation of jobs, where we can create opportunities for black empowerment in terms of equity in some of these projects, and we want developmental impact. So those are really the pillar of our consideration when we look at various projects in terms of investment. Yeah.
Mr. Mohale, let's look at where you come in now, the Infrastructure Fund and the Development Bank of Southern Africa. What strategies are you as an institution employing to attract the private sector investment in infrastructure? I just came back from a session where we were talking more about the 12 projects that we launched this morning. There was a lot of talk around making sure that there are also incentives for the private sector. So when you look at the funding mechanism, what are you doing as the Infrastructure Fund to make those projects attractive so that the private sector comes here and invests?
Thanks a lot, Clement, and good afternoon. Yeah, just for background purposes, the Infrastructure Fund was born out of a partnership between National Treasury, SIDSSA, and the DBSA, with each party playing, different roles. But the reason for existence is around blended finance, meaning we are existing so that we can identify those projects that lend themselves to blended finance, meaning that it's projects that without some sort of fiscal support, one way or the other, they wouldn't be attractive to the private sector to invest in. Yeah, so our role is exactly to do that, structure these projects from a financial, legal, technical perspectives, and engage with government, depending on the structure, for government to make contributions to the project so that they are really bankable. And once that has been done, we then engage with the market to get them to participate in the financing of the projects. So that's really what we are doing. And the reason we are doing this on behalf of government is for several reasons. One being lack of capacity from the owners of the projects to be able to structure and attract participation from the investors on their own. So we are playing in a role that has got a gap from a capacity perspective. And the idea is that we use the fiscal allocations to these projects to, at a much higher scale, crowd in private sector participation. And in the last 3 years of our existence, we've been able to do a number of projects. As we explained yesterday, close to 70 billion of projects that are now ready to go out to market for them to think of participating, both from a construction perspective as well as financing. Yeah, that's really our role. Thank you. Yeah.
Joey, as someone who is involved in public-private partnerships in the Western Cape government, sometimes when you're structuring these agreements, there are sometimes complex infrastructure projects. When you look at the Tigerberg Hospital, for instance, how do you navigate those challenges? Thank you very much. How do you navigate those challenges as someone who is involved in structuring these agreements?
Okay, thanks, Clement. Colleagues, good afternoon. Just to paint a picture of my sort of scenario, I've been contracted in after coming out of retirement to manage this project that you've just referred to, which is the Tygerberg PPP. And when I listen to the colleagues out here, I'm tempted to take my hat, if I had one, and say, guys, can you just contribute? Because I don't want to pay anything back towards that. Because right now, the solution is, how much of that can we get the philanthropic type of donations and grants in order that government is not pushed in a situation where currently we are squeezed to the hilt from a fiscal point of view. But coming back again, Clem, to the point that you raised, which is quite interesting. I was fortunate. I mean, my first cap in the province was with the Treasury. So I was involved in all of the PPPs that were implemented in the province. And currently, I'm now in this particular one, which is a mega project. And when I say mega from a quantum point of view of the investment that's required, it's fairly substantial and significant. However, in a PPP, you've got to be able to, I mean, what is a PPP? It's a commercial transaction whereby a private sector performs an institutional function on behalf of the public sector. And one of the challenges you have is the savvy of commercialized and business type of acumen that one needs to have in the public sector. And that is lacking, and unfortunately, at this point in time. So I'd spent 20 years in the private sector, and now another 21 years now in the public sector. And one of the challenges, and Clement, this is where this thing starts to get very, very challenging, is that contract that gets concluded has to be managed in a particular manner. And if that is not the case, and colleagues, I'm not sort of throwing this out in a bad way, the private sector will take you to the cleaners. I mean, that's happened in one or two of the projects. And if you don't have that type of capacity in-house, then we actually should move away from this particular process of PPPs, but I'm not saying shy away. There is a bit of capacity building that's currently in place as well. From a blended finance point of view, I think there's also this complex sort of transactions and contracts that also need to be drawn up, but there too you need that capacity. So coming back to the point again, Clement, I'm saying that at this point in a project of this magnitude, I'm fairly confident. I do get assistance from a team of experts that's in the various streams of technical, clinical, and land enablement that is required, and also a transaction advisory team. With that sort of blend, I think I'm fairly comfortable, but I want to come back to one or two other issues at a later point when the time is appropriate. Thanks, Clement.
No worries. Zakele, Nedbank plays a key role in infrastructure finance across the continent. When you look at the risk-return profile of some of these infrastructure projects that are seeking the public-private partnerships and blended financing, what do you assess there?
Nedbank has been in the infrastructure financing more so from a PPP perspective, since the whole concept was introduced in the continent. I sit in the section of the bank that consider opportunities on an off-balance sheet basis, where we are funding at the back of long-term off-taker or a concession. It's all about identifying risk and mitigating all those risks. So you mentioned that we're financing across the continent. Yes, when Nedbank has a risk appetite, that means it has to be a country that embraces private sector investments. It has from policy is being in place, regulatory frameworks, stability in terms of political stability, and also demonstrating pro-private sector investments in terms of attracting foreign direct investment and also capital flows. It has to be a country that is pretty much endowed with sectors that make revenue. But then there are also other social sectors that also requires banks like ours to partner with multilateral development banks from a co-financing perspective and also from risk mitigation perspective. And also, given that we finance in social sectors, we also have to ensure that the financing arrangements ultimately do make sense for the end user. Affordability is key. So how Nedbank applies itself from that perspective, the blending in of financing doesn't only happen at project level. We do take up lines of credits on a concessional financing arrangements to make sure that we are able to mitigate the risk of affordability ultimately. So we have lines of credits from the likes of African Development Bank, the World Bank, and other multilateral development banks. But also we mitigate some of the risks by ensuring that we have the right partners where we are invited or we proactively engage ourselves in blended financing arrangements, for instance, in the water sectors and other sectors where we work closely with DFIs and special purpose funds like the infrastructure fund, just to ensure that our offering as a private sector bank does not dilute the financing to the detriment of the end user from that perspective, because we are a commercial bank and we seek to achieve commercial returns. But where we participate in a blended financing arrangement, you find that the end user ultimately is cushioned by concessional financiers like MDBs and DFIs and special purpose funds for that purpose, where also we remain to take the the commercial aspect of the financing arrangement as per our shareholder perspective. It's all about mitigating a plethora of risks from credit and other risks that are technical risks in a typical project financing arrangement. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to pass over the mic back to Leila. Do you have any examples you can share with us, Leila, of just successful projects that have been facilitated by the African Development Bank? Just examples of the successful, public-private partnerships and blended financing projects, and also, what do you think led to those successes? And in cases where there have been challenges, what lessons are there for future initiatives?
So we have many examples. I mean, the one that comes to my mind is the toll road, and we have many, but specifically the toll road in Senegal, in Dakar. That was covering Senegal previously, and the West Africa region, whereby we helped structure this PPP project, and we provided long-term financing for the government, so sovereign long-term loan, but also a sovereign, a non-sovereign to the private sector part of it. So the long-term maturity is important, but most importantly, we start from the feasibility of the project. So we have project financing facility, we financed it, we recruited also, some capable transaction advisors, so we help them to structure all along. I think of course we cannot generalize because it depends on the sector, but what is important, and I'm repeating it, is this parity in terms of benefits when we look at a PPP. Because a PPP is where, let's take a port in a PPP or a toll road, is where the government has to put some public finance to fill the commercial gap of this critical infrastructure. That's, so how to value this commercial gap from the private sector perspective, and how to continue. Second, if it's, for instance, an IPP in energy, what tariff, will be applied? How the government will be negotiating the tariff? And we are now in discussion for 1 year because the government is saying, I don't accept this tariff, We are trying to provide this also part of our advisory role. And third, I think it has been explained, it's I think this morning, but it's also the political commitment, because some countries, they feel like the public-private partnership is a sort of, we are selling our assets to, foreigners, because if we look at, these mega infrastructure projects, unfortunately, and we do have capacity, private sector that is quite strong in Africa, but most of, the sponsors are from outside Africa. And this is what we need to change. So what we are doing also is to support regional champions. And by supporting them and helping them grow, we will maybe make some, governments more comfortable of going into the public-private partnership era. And finally, it's capacity. If a government does not have capacity, South Africa has. But if a government does not have capacity, I know one country that has, they said to me, we have 42 PPPs projects. But when I looked at them and my team looked at them, none was ready to go, and none was negotiated. So it's a process that needs an integrated approach, a lot of advisory role, and a development bank like ours can provide that beyond, the financing aspects, because the financing aspect is just techniques, and we have the techniques, we have the expertise, syndication, MLA, long-term guarantee, etc. But the rest has to be worked out with the governments and the authorities and with the private sector.
So, Andy, what kind of projects or subsectors does the IDC have appetite for? And if you're able to share with us maybe how you assess the feasibility and the financial sustainability or viability of these infrastructure projects that are seeking blended financing.
I think I'd like to start by mentioning one that we're participating in right now, and lucky enough, it was mentioned this morning by Honorable Minister Zikalala, the Ukuvuselela project. The IDC is playing a key role in there. I think it's a great example of a PPP where us, Ford Motor Company, and Transnet are working at this rail corridor to move goods between Pretoria and the port in the Eastern Cape. So that is one that we look at. We look at water, we look at logistics, we look at rail as well. So, but in terms of assessment, we have capabilities within the IDC to take project from infancy. So we would do a project development and preparation part of it. As as the project grows, then we would probably see if we move into debt financing or equity if we're looking at empowerment. But we do have a very, very capable project development team with the preparation, assessment of viabilities. We would take a project from concept to pre-feasibility, feasibility, and take it to a bankable level where it is ready to. So that's how we approach these projects. Obviously, within all that development cycle, the de-risking is done, the assessment of viability is done. We have various stage gates where these projects are evaluated for us to find comfort in graduating them to the next level or deciding if they're not worth going forward with. So the sectors, I've mentioned rail, I've mentioned logistics. I'm limiting myself to these because we're at an infrastructure symposium, but beyond that, we could look at mining, we could look at the textile industry, we look at manufacturing. The IDC has a broad range of investment opportunities as we look at. Yeah.
Mohale, let's talk about project preparation. The President focused a lot on it this morning. Leila mentions that there are countries that will say these this is the amount of projects that we have, but when you really look at the project in your sense, they're not really ready. So where do you come in as the Development Bank of Southern Africa to help with project preparation so that these projects are bankable, they're ready for market?
Thank you. I mean, in our portfolio of around 13 projects, and this is advanced projects, hardly had we ever found projects ready, when we engaged with the willing sponsors. And ours is an opt-in system where we work with those who want to work with us. So in most cases, you find that there are gaps, and we work with those sponsors to close the gaps. As an example, the requirement for us structuring projects to attract National Treasury allocations, you need what we call cost-benefit analysis, which essentially says what will the project bring in from a socio-economic perspective. You find that most of the projects are lacking in that regard, but even in terms of financial models and so on. So we come in as a team to assist sponsors to address those gaps. And maybe to share one or two examples of projects that we have supported up to now. And we are a 3-year organization, and in the infrastructure world, that's a very short time. We are still crawling, but we have very good examples to share. One of them is around social housing. The Minister of DPWI mentioned it, Goodwood Station, which is here in Cape Town. We closed it in December, launched it with the Minister of Human Settlements. So our role there was to plug the gap around the 30% of the funding on a bridge finance basis, because commercial banks and investors are reluctant to participate during construction. And once the project goes into operation, we're gonna refinance and get out and do other projects, de-risk other projects for private sector participation. The second project, which is part of the construction book announced by the minister again this morning, is the Umkomas project, the water project in KZN. And there our role was to, together with TCTA, structure the project 24 billion, such that it services both the social and economic sectors, because that's what we want to achieve, leave no one behind. And in us structuring the project, we recognize that there's a gap for requiring 6 billion to be a grant, which government had to provide. And the other 6 billion through the IF was a concessional loan, interest-free loan of 6 billion. Leaving 12 billion that we attract from investors. In that 12 billion, 6 billion, we are earmarking it for DFIs to participate in. We're talking to most of the DFIs that are around here. And the last 6 billion will be coming from investors, your commercial banks and so on. So that's really our role that we play. The last example that I want to share is on an interesting human settlement project west of Johannesburg, in fact west of Soweto, Lufereng project, 30,000 units, where we are working with the city of Joburg and the Department of Human Settlement again to address the bulk infrastructure. So once we do that, you get private sector interested in the top structures. There we are providing 3.4 billion in the form of a grant, blending it with 3.3 billion from the private sector to unlock the bulk. And once that happens, you're having 30,000 units being unlocked. So we have bespoke structures for different projects. And that would be the result of us looking at the model, financial model, the income streams, understanding the users, the different components, and they are eventually coming with recommendations for National Treasury to help us de-risk the projects. Thank you.
Joey, as the Western Cape government, how do you assess the suitability of these PPP projects and financing, and what kind of strategies do you employ? Because you want to try and optimize value for money, but also you want to try and be careful of the risks that are associated with these partnerships.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Clement. With the guidelines and the PPP manual that has been issued, which was, I think, around 2004, but there are some amendments that have been mooted. The guidelines, which is regarded as probably one of the best in internationally and globally, provides a fairly rigid sort of process that one needs to pursue and follow. And without going into the details, there are three sort of key areas or three criterias, and my colleagues on the panel had actually mentioned some of them, and that is the transfer of risk, the affordability, that we need to ensure that the budget is able to pay for whatever is required if we do get the project closed, and then you've got the value for money, and that is a comparison to ensure that the private sector the private party would be able to perform that particular function at a more cost-effective manner than what public sector would do. So using those three criteria, I think that is a good sort of yardstick, a benchmark to actually ensure that we do meet that criteria, which is also what National Treasury, as the big brother, would want to see before, prior to giving the approvals. You've got to go through a few of those gates. So coming back to the point, yeah, this is exactly what we would do. But in a project of a magnitude of, let's say, 10 billion, the divide between affordability and value for money can be a very fine line and a very flimsy line as well, in fact. And there I sort of say to the colleagues on the panel as well, because they are the ones with the purse, and I must also thank the IF. They are giving us some support, which is at no charge, and sorry? Oh, okay. Is it? Oh, okay. Yeah. So in this particular project, there is some work that's required. They call it CBA, but they call it now cost-effective analysis, CEA, whatever. But that is being done at a fair at a fair cost, which is not required to be paid by the department. Thank you, sir. So I think that is, I'm not saying we're looking at freebies, but at the end of the day, one needs to ask yourselves, the more that we put the pressure on for the department or the private or the public sector to be paying, or the public institution, it's painful. The envelope is getting more and more tighter. There has been budget cuts. There has been austerity measures put in place. So colleagues, I'm preaching to the converted, but it's going to be very, very difficult times that we're going through. So coming back to a project, that is the basic and the fundamental, that test that we need to ensure, the asset test. These are the three criteria. If we go through that, that probably says, yeah, that ticks the box, that we can move on to the next phase of it. But again, I make that plea, if there's any sort of, basically there's three types of funding required in a PPP. Fundamentally, you have debt, equity, and you have government funding, which is through either capital contribution, donor, or grants as well, in fact. And if we can add something more to that, which was at no cost for the government institution, that's first prize, Clement. And that is something that we need to seriously look at. I don't want to take too much more time, but I want to just say one, if you just can allow me. And I want to talk about the infrastructure gap. And I think we all are aware, we all understand what we talk when we sort of mention the infrastructure gap. And there has to be a strategic view and a long-term, medium-term view on how we're going to be able to address that as well, in fact. And address it with the various stakeholders, public sector, private sector, donor funding, wherever you want to bring in. And also, if you're looking at a hospital which is an academic, you bring in the higher education institution, because they are keen to also to utilize that and also make some sort of contribution. So I think the bigger plan is to understand really what is that sort of gap and how we're going to be able to get a financing or funding plan in order that we can meet those demands that are going to be, that we're already facing. And I think it's now high time that we have some sort of a strategic infrastructure plan out in the open, so that the private sector is also well aware or what are some of the requirements and the quantum of investment that's required in the various sectors. In the various sectors is that I'm sort of, from government point of view, I'm talking more on the human settlements, the housing. Konradi was one of the projects that I managed through, and we were looking at some funding outside, and that's about approximately 4 billion rand that we had to. But at the point when we went out, we were fortunate that we got a taker for that, and that's currently probably another year and a half to completion. And then we have the hospitals, the schools, but that is something that is quite serious as well, in fact. And the last one is the backlog maintenance. I just thought, let me park that for now. Sorry.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask that you prepare your inputs and questions. We'll get to them in a moment. But before we do, Zakhele, as someone with expertise in infrastructure finance, what kind of trends are you noticing or are you foreseeing when it comes to the evolution of, the PPPs and the blended financing models in the African continent? Because the landscape is constantly changing. The needs are changing in infrastructure development and infrastructure investment.
The trends are quite diverse. We emerging from some of the crises that are interfacing with the global systems from the health, COVID-19 being one that proved how unprepared the continent was in the health sector. Therefore, a need to invest in health infrastructure, be it hospitals, the PPPs, and supporting services, laboratories, health diagnostic facilities, and so on. And that is largely a government sector play, but also very much so the private sector, play, and from an investment perspective, and the technology that is associated with running a hospital or a health facility. That's just one in the health sector in response to, COVID-19 pandemic, but also in preparation for, unknown pandemics that we may have in future. Climate change is also one that is proven to be one of the top 5 global risks that challenges how we plan for infrastructure and also execute infrastructure that is able to respond to climate changes. We are in an energy crisis, but also we are in a energy transition from moving from fossil fuel to green energy sources. There's new asset classes that are emerging. They're still at very inception in the form of the green hydrogen. We know that we've been rolling out over the past decade or so wind and solar in South Africa, but still that's not enough. We're exploring energy storage solutions. Those are some of the trends that are driven by the demands in response to the current challenges. The world is faced with conflict that emanates from the Ukraine war, conflict in the Middle East, redirection of shipping lines away from the Red Sea across the continent, along the shores of Africa. Is that an opportunity? Are our ports ready for any of the opportunities that were never planned, that emanate from the challenge that is being faced as a result of conflict? But also in the continent itself, we have pockets of conflicts that really are presenting a need that are stretching budgets from governments to respond to social needs, but also to be fighting wars or ensuring that we have appropriate defense systems. That really is a challenge, and that talks to issues of having solid stability to ensure that Africa as a continent will remain a viable investment destination. On the positive side, we still are in a continent that is endowed with national resources from the mining, agriculture, mainly in the landlocked countries or landlocked parts of countries that have shore, good infrastructure to evacuate commodities. The mining sector is driving economic growth for those countries and therefore needs appropriate capacity infrastructure ranging from rail, roads, cross-border infrastructure, ports, back of ports, operations, storage, terminals, and so on. So those are the trends that are driven by, commodities. We've just had the mining in Durban. Most of us were there, see a lot of faces of them were there. We know where the mining sector is going and the challenges that it's facing. We also looking at future assets that, as I mentioned, that has to deal with the decarbonizing of infrastructure. In South Africa, I think the next opportunity in the electricity infrastructure sector is transmission lines. Good to have my colleagues in the panel with me, because this also interfaces in their sectors, from project preparation to investment, either through debt or equity, but also in the room there are opportunity enablers, advisors, developers, investors in infrastructure. I'm sure they are in conversations in preparation for the next frontier of infrastructure in the electricity space and other sectors. You've already touched on Health PPP, Tigerberg. There's also opportunities still in the roads sector, with concessions that are in place that need to continue in one form or another through private sector or state interventions. I'm sure solutions are in this room to ensure that the sustainability of our infrastructure remains. And all of these I've summed up, touches on the environment, and the social and the governance, the ESG, which is something that we cannot totally ignore as a trend driver across the sectors that we interface with, either from a financing or from being a developer or an investor. Thanks.
Thank you very much. If you've got some inputs, I see some hands, please can you raise your hand? Give us your name, your surname, and the organization you represent, and then I think we will share this mic. Sir, do we have a roving mic, or should I share this one? All right, cool. Please give us your name, and if you're directing the question to either Zakele, Joey, Mohale, Andy, or Leila, please say so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Rufuno Ratsiku. I'm representing the. Okay. Are we fine? I am representing the SACPC. It's a regulatory body for construction project managers and other professions. Mine is, I just quickly went to the South African manual for PPP, as he referred to, and I find an opening statement when I was looking for something else that says South Africa is proudly amongst the leading countries in the world in terms of the law, policy, and systems which have established the public-private partnership. Now, this just leads me to a question. I actually am tempted to suggest that as a country, to an extent, we must stop praising our policies until they give us the results. because to an extent even our own constitution, and fair enough, we have lifted it and glorified it, but you look at the results that it's giving us, and you say, maybe we should first wait there, and for it to give us better fruits, then we'll praise it again. My input is with regard to the decarbonization, which is leading to deindustrialization. And I ask myself whether this public-private partnership, is it strategic when it comes to avoiding bullying by the financiers? To say, we will fund you, but stop using coal. We will fund you, and they keep quiet about clean technology, clean coal technology, while the geosciences and CSIR says we still have about 400 years of coal discovered, leave alone the undiscovered, that we can still use. But the system of funding is bullying us out of using God-given minerals. How strategic is that when we work with IMF, World Bank, and we are told not to use certain commodities, but to use another? Then the direct question is, what are we doing? Maybe from a perspective of DBSA, African Development Bank, and others. They can go to BRICS and so on, to avoid a system where the conditions are so tight that our economy, we cannot work with what we have. We have to be so creative to find new ways and to avoid projects that we know that they result into mass employment, such as coal. Thank you very much.
I'm Dr. Sele Mahoy. I'm representing the University of Cape Town from the Civil Engineering Department. I'm originally from Sierra Leone. In the beginning, God said, let there be light. And all came to reality. We know South Africa is a powerhouse, although energy is still a crisis. But if South Africa is to be developed today, relative to other countries in Africa, it's because of energy. You still have a long way to go if you are to industrialize this entire country. Okay, I can try again. Yeah. You know, whenever I see the Chinese in my country, in the continent, my blood runs cold. Because I know exactly what they're doing. The Chinese, actually, the people refer to them as a communist state. But this is communism spelled with a capital C, if you know what I mean. It's a capitalist state. China has used Africa as a source of raw materials and a dumping site for cheap goods. It is happening in my country. It's happening in most parts of the world, most parts of Africa, and other areas in the world that have given them this red carpet welcome without knowing what they're doing there. I'm worried, and I refer to myself as a political engineer, in the sense that without the politics, just like Nkrumah said, seek ye first the political kingdom, and all other things shall be added unto you. Now I see this opportunity. I graduated in 2006 from UCT, funded by taxpayers' money in this country, but I decided to give back to this country. That is to take the IDC. I approached the IDC 2010. To Kwani Solo and Ashley Peterson, you might know them. We went to Sierra Leone to look at investments in energy. Because of this same bureaucracy and the bottlenecks and the risk that you don't want to take, we were there for like almost 2 years in and out of the country. Nothing was achieved. We were so afraid. The Chinese are good at taking the risk. They took the risk. Today, China, 40 years ago, they were not like this. China today is the second largest economy in the world because they saw Africa as that source, including my country that had been raped and raped. So I don't know this time. I approached one of your colleagues yesterday, the IDC, because I'm focusing on energy. I approached them and said, look, how can we go there this time and make things work? The question now is, how prepared are you to take this risk to make sure that this big brother in Africa becomes big enough to protect our economy in Africa We have a lot to give to this country, but you don't know what you have until you go into Sierra Leone and other parts of Africa. Then you know that South Africa, Nigeria has taken over. The biggest economy in Africa is Nigeria. And you know the music and everything they're doing now they go back to Nigeria. So I'm saying, this time, how prepared are you, IDC, and other investors, to go and look at the opportunities that we have that side, more especially the energy, to make sure that this border crossing will be minimized. Otherwise, I'm telling you, just like Mexico, people will jump the border. You cannot stop them. You need to industrialize other parts, go and support other parts of Africa, then your problems will be minimized. I think this time, I want to throw the ball back to you to ask, what are you doing to make sure that South Africa becomes a power and to take over, or to protect our wealth in Africa? Thank you very much.
Hi there, Matthew from Crutham. Very simple question. The triple P, or the PPP that's just been updated in the Gazette, how do you find that in terms of improving scalability of infrastructure projects? And if it isn't good enough, where could it improve? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Panelists, I just have a question. My name is Ikageng Mutuka. I run a company called Ikageng Mosadi Holdings. I'm doing an infrastructure development project in the Northwest Province in bringing services and retail through to the communities in the Breads area. Being a black woman, sorry to bring it up, but I am experiencing that most of the entities, IDC, DBSA, Infrastructure Fund, you work in silos, and the banks, sorry. You seem to be working in silos and not making it easy for the end users seeking your funding. And by saying that is that you'll apply to IDC, they do their own bankability, recommendations, you go to DBSA, it's the same thing. So it ends up taking very long to get anything, including the project preparation funds are just taking and dragging into my third year of pursuing this project, because it's a back and forth between funders, because now there's no standard approach across all funding infrastructure funders within our country. That's the first challenge. And then the second challenge is that accessibility of such funds. So you get the land, and obviously it's a transaction, either my transaction is through lease with the traditional council. I pay for the guarantee for the lease. I try to get the funding for the notarial registration of the lease, and that is also a challenge. So I don't know, starting from the ground, I think my question, sorry to take long, Session Chair, but I need guidance, maybe, more of advice. Starting a project right from the ground, from zero or from personal savings, and trying to go through all these banking or funding requirements is a very costly process. Is there an interim or gap process that any of you offer to a user like myself to bridge that finance? There's the rezoning costs, there's the lease registration costs, so you end up having to have a budget of over 5 million just to get funding to start anything, and it becomes quite difficult for other people. I mean, it's taken me so long to get to this point where I am, but is there that preparation? I don't know, by the term project preparation, what is incorporated in that?
All right, thank you very much for the questions. Just to remind the panelists, I know some of you have been writing some of the questions. There was a question about decarbonization and how strategic the triple P is when it comes to avoiding the bullying from those that are funding us to decarbonize. How do we avoid having those tight conditions? I'll see who can take that question there. You'll take that, Leila? All right. There's a question as well around taking risks and how prepared are we to take risks when it comes to energy. Somebody asked about the procurement bill. How does it improve scalability, the scalability of these infrastructure projects? And the last question from Mikacheng around working in silos and how much it costs just to get financing. Shall we start with you, Leila?
Yeah, so it's, are you hearing me? No, it's a very interesting and at the same time difficult debate. What I will try to do is not to respond directly to the question, but explain how we do it. So first of all, we need to start with, the governments and many governments' commitment to climate change, to the national determined contribution. So each and every government has made this commitment vis-à-vis this international architecture of global warming and climate change issues. So if a government made a commitment, he is monitored towards implementing this commitment. This is one. Second, I think when we look at energy transition, and we are very clear, it's a process. It's a very long process. So we need to be prepared as a government, and part of the difficulty is this just part. So in the case of South Africa and other countries, Canada as well, if we look at decommissioning, these coal plants, power plants, etc., first of all, as far as I know, the government is looking at the ones that are no more, able to function. So it's not that one is functioning and we decommission it. So, and second is to assess the impact on the social aspect of it. So we are, carrying out a study on the impact on the social impact of this energy transition process on women in some region in South Africa. We will have the results as soon, I think, maybe in 2 months' time, which will lead us to how we can best provide the support, but never. We are not saying we will finance you if you decommission. This, at least for the African Development Bank, I'm sure for the IMF and the World Bank, it doesn't work like that. But we have board of directors and we have strategies. And we have also responsibility vis-à-vis the future of generation in Africa. So we are only financing renewable energy projects. In terms of financing, we are financing some transition fossil fuel like gas, but not that much. But we are no more financing fossil fuel like the coal power plant, or we used to several years ago. So it's our choice, a responsible choice, because we strongly believe that the future of the planet, and it's not just words, is the future of our children and your grandchildren. So an institution like the African Development Bank has to be responsible, going from its president, the board, and us, that are working. But we are not imposing to governments. That's for sure. Yeah, and maybe as conclusion, and I'm saying it because it's important. It's really a process, and I think the government of South Africa, along with support from private sector in these PPP and IPPs, he's doing very well in defining this process as we move forward without, hampering the competitiveness of its economy. It's not easy. If you put your shoes yourself in the shoes of whatever, a minister or a head of state. It's not easy. The decision is not easy, but they are doing quite well, and we are providing full support to them as they move, without imposing anything. Because also, I mean, the authorities and the South African are very bright and smart. So we are coming with what we can. Maybe we are bringing some experience from other countries. Maybe sometimes we tell them what they don't know, bringing another level of expertise. But yeah, nobody's imposing anything. That's what I wanted to.
Yeah, maybe before I move on, I'll just like to echo what Leila has said. Being from the African Development Bank, I'm from the IDC. We operate in the same space. I think subscribing to principles of responsible banking is very key in how we conduct business. So along the same lines, the IDC has principles that we've opted to abide to in terms of how we fund and what we fund. There are many sectors where, not many, but some sectors where we wouldn't get involved because of just those principles of responsible banking. In terms of maybe coal and fossil fuel, I know we still fund expansion projects. We still have a question mark on new projects. We are aligned with the strategy of the South African government because we actually are a dependent of the government in some way through the DTIC. So. Yeah, I don't think there are any pressures or any bullying that we have experienced, but I think we just operate according to certain principles. Risk, Sierra Leone, I can go there with you tomorrow. But when in my introduction I said we look at economic viability of projects and ventures that we get involved in. And that is like a piece of string. It's very difficult for me to define how long or how complex that could be. We look at investments each on their own merit. We look at country of investment. We also have universal guidelines of country risks that we have to abide to. We have, again, a board, we have a shareholder that also gives us guidance in how we operate. It is not a simple decision to take in terms of where and how we invest. We have a series of stage gates in terms of committee approvals, risk reviews, decision makers that have to be convinced before we take the step. To go and see what is happening in the continent. We do have a mandate as the IDC. To fund development project through the continent. Hence, people were able to travel with you to Sierra Leone for a number of times, which I think we still are open to, because risk appetite changes overnight or over a year, over a month. So do not get discouraged. Please, if you need to talk to us, please come again. But we look at it. But risk has to be managed. We cannot go blindly, or we cannot go on emotions. Unfortunately, we are a business. Economic viability is very important to us because we do get some line of credits as well. We do raise money into the debt market that we have to repay. So we got to be cautious how we play with that money. I wanted to touch a little bit on Ikareng's question as I hand over to Mohale because he's also going to get into the same. So you wanted to know about if there are any funds that you could access. In your case particularly, and you don't have to apologize for being a black woman. We do have through the DTIC some possibilities of looking into that. As we sit here, the IDC will be hosting the Black Industrialist conference tomorrow. So if you're in Johannesburg tomorrow, please come there. There is a Black Industrialist Fund. There's a Women Empowerment Fund. So there is those things, those vehicles are there, maybe it's a matter of guidance on how to access and how to reach them. But it's a conversation we can have. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe on the same issue, Ikareng, the project prep space is quite a challenging one because as you know, it's pre-equity, basically. You could even say it's pre-venture capital. Yeah, so you require largely donor funding for it, because if you are an investor expecting returns, maybe 1 out of 10 would work. You know, you put money in 10 projects, you're lucky if one of them end up being successful. I think that's really the experience. But as my colleague says, there could be pockets of funding, you know, all over the place. You just need to locate them. And from a DBSA perspective, I'm wearing an IF hat right now, but I know about DBSA, given my previous role. I will get you in touch with the executive consent at DBSA, who's responsible for project prep. She's around here. Hopefully after this you can meet with her. And she would explore, you know, areas where she can be of support. But I think going forward, there's also a need for government and donors to put more money into project prep, especially for new entrants, as it's not possible for those who are looking for returns to rely on this, you know, stage of investment. Regarding PPP regulations, I'll just take and then I'll hand over to Mr. Pillay. Just on, from our perspective, we, as a team of IF, we had a look at those, and two things we think are positive. The first one is around clarity on the unsolicited bid, you know, dispensation, where as a you know, a developer or an entrepreneur, you can do that within a clear framework, you know, better than before. Also positive is the streamlining of, you know, smaller projects from an approval perspective. I think it's 2 billion that has been set. There's a case to increase it. Maybe as part of your comments, you can agitate for a higher amount, because this 2 billion is for the life cycle costs. It's not just for the capital today. So if you present value it over the life of the project, it could be much smaller. So I think those, from our perspective, are the two positives. Over to you. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Chairman, if I could continue from there and just latch on to those two issues. The very first one is quite important. They talk of the USP, which is unsolicited, unsolicited proposal. There is a circular currently in place from the National Treasury, which is, I think, a circular 11 of 2008-2009, which fleshes out the details on how one could approach an unsolicited bid. But when you read the amendments and understand what they're trying to get to, they're looking at very much specific PPP, and they are, and National is also talking of putting out certain criteria, which is an important thing that the private sector needs to understand what will be required and how do they identify potential projects via this particular mechanism. The second point as well, and this is one of the comments that I've also sent through, is whilst they've sort of speak about the 2 billion, you must also remember that we are not getting, oh, not we, but the private party and government is not getting away totally. We would require to go back to the Treasury for what they call their review and comments, recommendations. And if one doesn't apply those sort of recommendations, they're basically saying, guys, you cannot go out on procurement, or you could you will be held accountable. So on one hand, they're giving you that leeway, but they're also saying to you in the same breath, just watch it, we need to still actually review that, because at the end of the day, this culminates into a PPP contract. So they also need to have that sort of take as well, in fact. There's a third one which is quite useful, I think, and this is talks to the capacity building. they've got the so-called government technical advisory unit out there, and they're trying to build capacity at the various treasuries in the various provinces. So I think that is useful because that is lacking in some areas as well. Thanks. Thanks. Sorry.
Thanks. I'll just touch on the issue of decarbonization and vis-a-vis avoidance of job losses or deindustrialization. I think as a country we faced with the challenge of not having sufficient power to drive our economy, and yet we are endowed with coal and the policies globally signed by countries at COP or global environmental pacts that have been put in place to decarbonize our economies. South Africa, we cannot escape that, whilst also recognizing that we have these coal-powered power station that needs to be decommissioned over time. Hence you hear of a term just energy transition. By just, it means that it has to be done in a very responsible way for that particular country. For us, in terms of avoiding job losses, as banks like ours, we also have to take that into consideration. Nedbank has been in the forefront of financing renewable energies since the IPP program commenced in 2009, 2010. And we still embracing new technologies that are being put to the market for us to consider, which some of them I've mentioned. But also we have to learn from countries like, you mentioned country like China. China is a highly industrialized country that still heavily relies on coal energy source, but also one of the biggest investors in renewable energy in the form of wind and other sources of green energies. And taking it further to also embracing the electrification of vehicles, whilst largely still sourced from coal-fired, but there is a transition that we'll see in future that they will be less reliant on coal. For us, it will be the same. That will be driven by the government's energy source strategy. You hear of the energy mix that includes renewables and fossil fuel, but there is a transition that will happen over time. I think across the panel here, from a financing perspective, we cannot escape that, but start embracing in terms of where the global world is going in terms of embracing a much environmentally friendly planet for our future generations. Touch a bit on financing in what is deemed to be high-risk countries from the bank like ours. Nedbank has, within the infrastructure financing team, our in-house export credit finance team that assists us in risk mitigating some of the identified risk, from political risk to credit, technological risk and payment risk, by finding appropriate risk covers from the likes of MIGA, the African Development Bank, partial risk or political risk covers, partial credit covers, and also private insurers who will insure a project that we are financing from a debt perspective, ensuring that we are well covered in the event of that risk becoming a reality, be it technology risk, because we also finance sectors that are highly reliant on technology that can fail the project and affect the project's performance over time. So that's part of the risks that we cover. That we cover. So we have our in-house team. You note my title says co-head. So I focus on the debt finance, project finance. Then I have my co-head, Mr. Siketle Mohatle, who's been with the bank for some time, who oversees the risk mitigation, working with, amongst others, ECIC and some of the institutions that I've mentioned. That's overall, takes into consideration. Also in South Africa, we do face those risks. This is not risk that sits way in other countries. Even in South Africa, we do look at how's the political climate like, how's the state of the the technology availability. Some of the solutions that are being brought in to be used here, we source them from foreign countries and Europe and China and so on. So we also have to source appropriate risk covers for those who are justified. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Can we take the last round of questions? We've got about 10 minutes or so left. 2 or 3 more questions.
Hi, thank you. This is directed to Nedbank particularly, but I think DBS, IF and IDC can also come in. In terms of just the use of, you spoke about insurance, so guarantee products, particularly in a market like South Africa, that's quite well developed, and in terms of risk assessment, what is your perception of being able to crowd in, private sector investment, being able to use insurance products or guarantee products to bring that private sector investment in?
Thanks. My name is Flora Marutles Malane, and I'm from the Infrastructure Fund. Asking my ex-employer or representative Zakhele a question to you. So I think when you were giving your intro, you mentioned concessional type of benefits or sources of funding or lines of credit that Nedbank is in receipt of. So I think for me, obviously being in the government space and coming from private sector, can you elaborate more on what this looks like? I mean, if you are receiving concessional benefits, I would assume you would pass that down to your clients, right? And being a bank and the bottom line being important for your shareholders, I'm not sure how you would do that. So can you elaborate on the types of products that you were possibly referring to when you said you do get some concessional funding from the likes of AFD or NDB, etc., and what that looks like when you pass that down to the customer? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Zakhele.
Thank you. I'll start with the first one in terms of what is deemed to be appropriate arrangements for de-risking infrastructure in SA to encourage private sector. I did mention key themes in terms of the country being stable from political stability, and also having the right institution in place, be it SOEs, agencies, and policy frameworks to ensure that private sector participation from implementation and financing happens. But also, I did also mention that most of the sectors that we finance across, be it transport, logistics, water, and digital infrastructure, relies on technology providers from original equipment manufacturers who are from various countries. We need to ensure that we use the appropriate technological solutions and also risk mitigate those type of technologies that we use from perspective of equipment failure that may severely impact the performance of the assets that we are financing, of the project, of the deal that we are financing. I will not name technological service providers and all that, but I think it's something that we should understand in terms of the concept. Credit risk is one also. We have to ensure that we have a bankable business case, that someone has to pay for the service ultimately, be it a road concession, be it a water treatment works, be it a hospital. These are ultimately brought to existence to offer a certain service that has to be paid for. Therefore, justifying a bank like ours to become involved. Whereas there are sectors that maybe from a commercial viability cannot be justified to be debt financed. Those are become the responsibility of government from grant financing, as we know. These are some of the issues that we need to ensure that they are in place in South Africa, which I mentioned that we always thought that South Africa is unique to the rest of the continent in terms of all these risks. We do have these risks in a similar way than Sierra Leone or other parts of the continent. It's just that we still have in South Africa a resilient economy that is able to absorb these shocks. However, we remain ready to plug them in as and when they are necessary, because things can change for better also, but they can also change for negative. In terms of concessional financing, I will just maybe clarify my statement. Nedbank, like other banks, we raise financing in various ways. We take deposits from the likes of us and make money out of that. We raise funds in the capital markets, we issue bonds, but also banks like ours, peer banks like ours, we get approached or we proactively raise funds from multilateral development financing institutions, the likes of the World Bank, African Development Bank, and those are offered on semi-concessional rates. Then we pass on them. Of course, we don't pass them as they are. We have to make money out of them. We have to justify why we take those lines of credit. However, banks like AFDB and World Bank do direct finance directly on projects on a co-financing with us where it's justified. So sometimes there are justifications why they will use a financial intermediary like us or DBSA or IDC. We have economies of scale to ensure that the funds are managed and distributed in a risk-adjusted way, so to justify a credit line. There are limitations that multilateral development banks have, especially when it comes to certain specifics around maybe local currency financing, that we as commercial banks are better placed to handle that aspect. As you know, you've worked for Nedbank before. When we look into a project, there's a CAPEX side of the project, but also there's other ancillary financing opportunities that we are able to respond to from perspective of being a commercial bank that require local currency financing. Whereas the lines of credit that we seek to raise from multilateral development banks, though they will come at slightly competitive rates, they are also hard currency, dollar lending, of which we have to convert and use local currency and find solutions appropriately. The bank largely operates on commercial returns. There will be no justification for us to pass on concessional financing as much as we would love to in a non-competitive way that will not achieve our shareholder expectations. However, where risks are well mitigated in a financing opportunity, we do aim to offer our pricing, I would say competitively, but not concessionary.
Thank you very much. We come to the end of this session. Please help me appreciate Zakhele, Joey, Mohale, Andy, and Leila. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Can I have a picture? Just you can just stand here. I'll have Eddie just. I think you just push this.